Hey, welcome back. This first part of the video is a quick overview of the banking transactions worksheet. The entire training video for the banking transactions worksheet is quite long, and it's therefore broken down into sections that you can skip to in order to go to specific topics on how to use this worksheet. To skip to one of the sections, just scroll down on the YouTube page and see the links to the different sections of this video and click on the appropriate hyperlink to go right to that section. In this section, I'm going to give you a quick start, 5-minute overview of entering transactions so that you can get an idea or a general idea of how this worksheet works. You can then choose which sections of the video you want to go to in order to get the full details. The bank and credit card transactions tabs are at the heart of this spreadsheet, and it's where you enter all of your transactions. Entering information here is how you can then rely on the spreadsheet to track everything for you. And so I've done a lot of work to try and make entering transactions as fast and easy as possible. So let's start with basics, or the basics of entering a transaction. I'm on the banking transactions tab right now. And you start by going to an empty row in the transactions section, which is located below row 8, so below this row here, and just above this yellow zone here. So all transactions normally get entered here. When you run out of lines, all you have to do is pick a line. Could be down here or down here, for example. Hit the right button to right click and insert, and it'll insert a row for you. Now, to enter a transaction, all you got to do, go right to the date, and let's do one here. So let's say we enter November 1st as the transaction date. This is a transaction that you would see, for example, in your checking account with a date according or corresponding date for it. And let's say here in this case, I want to enter in like a bi-monthly pay, right? So that's my description. And because that's a deposit in my bank account, it's going to be a credit. So let's say every 2 weeks, I get a $500 deposit. So that's the credit. Over here in the category column, that is a form of revenue. So that's what I've picked here in the main category section. And as a subcategory of revenues, I'm going to say that that is my pay. Now I can enter a descriptive note if I wanted to. So for example, I could just put in test or whatever descriptive note you want to. And finally, down here in the last column, the account column, you have to tell it to which account this transaction is associated to. So here it is checking, and that's the one by default. And there you go. I've got a first transaction entered. It's not really anything more complicated than that, and it's as quick as that. So let's give you another example here of another transaction. So that was a deposit. Let's do or take a look at, for example, an expense. So again, I'm on an empty row here, and what I'm going to do is enter, let's say, November 2nd as a transaction date. And let's say this is something that I bought at the grocery store, so at Super C, and let's say for $150 of groceries. And this time around, the revenue, or sorry, not the revenue, but the category is going to be groceries, subcategory for food. And again, I could have put a note. I'll leave it blank for now. And this is also in my checking account. So there you go. Two examples, one a deposit, another one an expense. Let me show you now this time around how you can capture transferring money from your checking account to a savings account. And so what you do is you just find an empty row, you go here, you highlight that, and as the this section here shows you in the summary of the functions, you can see that if I do and hold that is the Alt key followed by J, that is to do or activate the transfer money between accounts. And so you say it's from, let's say, from my checking account to my savings account, and let's say I transfer over, I don't know, $100, and I click OK. And what you're going to see is two transactions. It's telling you Money transfer transactions were created in rows 11 and 12. And so it took today's default date. It entered in a description, which you can edit. So you can edit the date, you can edit the description that it put in. You can see one transaction is a debit to take money out of your checking account, and the other one is a credit to your savings account. Now, in both cases, there are no categories or subcategories because this is just a transfer between two banking accounts. Last thing I want to show you is how you can make a credit card payment. So same idea here. Let me find an empty row. Let's say this time around I want to show that I've paid my Visa credit card bill. So I'm going to highlight the row, and as you can see in the commands that are here, for a credit card payment, I press and hold the Alt key followed by U. I also get a pop-up that shows up, and this time around I'm going to be paying, let's say, my Visa card, but I'd be able to pick any one of these. The amount, so let's say, I don't know, it's $125, and I'm paying that from my checking account, and I'm going to click on OK. And it does two transactions. So it says placeholder on row 13 and a placeholder on row 32 of the credit card transaction. So I'm going to go click on OK. And as you can see, it used today's date. You could change that date. It put in a descriptive text. You could edit that. There's the payment coming out of your checking account. And under your credit card transaction, sometimes it'll put it higher, lower, it depends. Here this time around, it put it on the last row. You can move it up. I'll show you how to do that in a second. It did not put a date, and that's by design, and that's because usually the payment for your credit card will occur a few days later by the time it gets processed and received on their side. And so no date has been put in yet. That's why this line is in italic blue to show that no date has been associated with that. I'll explain that a little bit later in some of the other videos. If I wanted to move that up here, I could do a cut. And let's say I wanted to put it here. I'll put it in second row if I wanted to. Any row doesn't really matter. And then finally, when you do receive or see that the payment has gone through, let's say it's 2 days later. So let's say on November 5th, just put in the date, and now it's put in and associated with the correct credit card. Now, there are other types of transactions that are possible within this worksheet, and I'll get into that in some of the other sections of this video. Just know, however, that what I just showed you corresponds to about 95% of the types of transactions you'll enter in this worksheet. One final thing I want to point out is that the spreadsheet does track your account balances as a result of the transactions you enter. So for example, if I go here to cell C1 and I select the checking account, you can see that right now it's showing me the bank balance for the checking account is $225. If I were to change that now to, let's say, my savings account, that amount has changed. It's showing that it's $200. So it's always tracking based on your transactions and which accounts the bank balance for you. So you can get that displayed at any point in time. So that's it in a nutshell. The next sections of this video get into the full details of everything you can do in the banking transactions worksheet. I hope you agree that entering transactions is fast and easy, and I hope you actually have fun doing it. Good luck, and see you in the next section of the video. Hey, welcome back everyone. Congratulations, you've made it to the big leagues. We are in the transaction tabs, and specifically in this case here, we're going to take a look at the banking transactions tab, as you can see here below and in the main screen. So the banking and credit card transaction tabs are the two most important tabs of the spreadsheet. You're going to be spending most of your time here. And so this video is meant to be as thorough as possible on how to make the full and best use of them. I've created several sections in this video so that you can skip ahead or back to specific sections in the video, and where each section covers specific topics like how to enter a multi-item transaction or how to capture payment of credit cards, those kinds of things. So if you scroll down on the YouTube page, you'll see the links to the different sections of this video. And therefore, if you wish to skip ahead or back to a specific section, let's say to review, you can do that just by clicking on any of those hyperlinks. All right, so we're going to get started here in a moment to talk about, before actually we start talking about entering transactions, the next section or topic that I want to talk about is the discipline of entering your transactions. So that's coming up next. All right, the discipline of entering your transactions. Well, first, let me say a few words about the discipline of entering your transactions. As I said in the intro to this video, the banking and credit card transaction tabs are the two most important tabs of the spreadsheet. It's important to understand that the spreadsheet is only as good as the information you capture. So if you don't enter your transactions, then you won't get a full and accurate picture of your revenues and expenses and therefore your financial picture. So just keep in mind that deciding to track your transactions is part of being financially responsible, as well as a good way to help avoid financial fraud and be aware of transactions that are not yours. So by the way, banks track your logins and keep a history of this, so logging in on a regular basis establishes a track record. This can come in handy if you are the victim of fraudulent charges to your account, and you can make the case that you log in regularly to track your transactions and let them know that you made them aware as soon as you saw something that wasn't right. So take the habit of entering those regularly. So for example, I take just a few minutes every weekday. Weekends are vacation time, so I don't do that over the weekend. And I do that every weekday to log into my banking account and credit card website accounts and record the transactions that appear over into my spreadsheet. So I'm going to give you an example here by looking at both of those. So here's an example of the banking account that I'm logged into on their website. You can see here, right? They've got the tracking of when I last logged in. And these are the examples of the transactions that I take a look at and create an equivalent transaction for in my spreadsheet. So that's for the banking account. And this is the one for the credit card. And you can have several, but I'm just showing one here. Again, I log into this every day, take a few minutes, and take a look at the new transactions that have been entered. And I take a few minutes to enter those into my spreadsheet. So you should choose your own frequency. As I said, I do that every day. Just note that the longer the interval between entering transactions, the more transactions and time it will take to enter them. And you may not remember what the transaction was for if you haven't kept your receipts and waited too long. I suggest that waiting beyond a week will make you feel like this is a burden to do, and you may end up stopping to enter them. In my case, it takes me less than 5 minutes daily to do this, so it's very quick. It's part of my habit, it's part of my routine. It's the first thing I do when I start working in the morning, just to take that 5 minutes to get it done. You can choose your own time in the day. And after a short while, you're going to see that it's just something you do automatically, right? It's just something that you do, so it doesn't become something that feels burdensome to do. So you're going to see in the videos that cover the reporting aspects of the spreadsheet that there are a lot of benefits of doing this, as it'll give you insight into your spending habits. It'll show you what your current and future cash flow looks like, and therefore help you make informed budgetary and spending decisions. And finally, financial stress is a real thing, and a great way to help reduce it is a good understanding of your past, current, and future spending habits. I believe in the saying that states, money is a great servant, but a terrible master. And so hopefully the use of this spreadsheet will help ensure that money becomes and remains your servant as opposed to the terrible master. I sincerely hope that you'll find this spreadsheet useful to you. So here we go into the next section, which is the overview of the rows and the columns of this spreadsheet. Okay, just one more section left to go before we actually start getting into entering transactions. And what I wanted to do here was just walk you through the first few rows of the transactions tab. And by the way, everything that I explained in this video here is about exactly the same for the credit card transactions tab. So by going through this video, you'll already be ready to go into the credit card transactions tab. I'll create a video for that just for the small differences that exist, but everything else is the same. So let's start with the top 7 rows here, which I call the header rows of the spreadsheet. This is all for information purposes only. If I scroll up and down in the spreadsheet, you can see that they stay locked at the top so that you can always see what's there. Most of this is all highlighted with colors, which means that they've been protected. So don't worry about whether or not deleting something creates an issue, or it could be an issue if you hit a key by mistake to change the values that are in there. That's not going to happen. For example, here I just hit the delete key on that cell, the A1, and you can see that it gives you a message telling you that it's protected, right? So you can't touch it. Same thing if I were to go ahead and try and delete a row here, it'll say the same thing. It's a protected area. Conversely, if I try to insert a row at the top here, you'll get a message that says you can only insert between row 9 and the bottom yellow zone. So when I hit OK, it's actually going to undo that transaction and bring you back to where you were. So it's pretty well protected. Uh, Normally speaking, the only 3 or 4 places that you would play in the top section are these cells here that are not highlighted in color. And I'll get to those. There are a few others here that I'm pointing out. I'll get to those as I walk you through the top header row. So let's go through them so that we can quickly get to actually entering transactions. But it is important to understand what I've got here. So let's start with cell C1, which is this guy here. And that displays the name you gave to your checking account in the bank account tab. So if I go back to the bank account tab, you can see right here I gave it the name checking, and that is the name that appears here at the top. Okay. If I move over now to these 2 cells, which is D1 and D2, this tallies up, and specifically cell D2, it tallies up or totals up all of the debit transactions or the withdrawals that are captured in column D of this worksheet here. And we'll see how that amount changes over time as you start entering in transactions. And that your total debits that it will show or up here will be the total amount of debits up to the date that you have indicated here. So right now it would be the total debits all the way up to October 23rd, which is today's date. In the same way, column E1, cells E1 and E2 is the total credits. So those are the amounts or the total number of amounts that went into your bank account. And that's therefore the credit column here that it would total up. And again, that is as of the date that is indicated here. Cell F1 and F2 indicate the opening balance, which is the opening bank balance that again you entered in the bank account tab. So if I go back here, it is this amount here that you wrote or typed in. And so that always stays a fixed amount. And it uses that to say, to figure out the ending balance by saying take your opening balance, add all the credits, subtract all the debits, and then that'll give you your bank balance. So that's what cells F1 and F2 indicate. Cells G1 and G2 show the ending balance date to use when determining the total debits and total credits and the bank balance amounts. So if I click right now in cell G2, you can see up here that it defaults to this function in Excel that's called the today function, which just means that it's always going to use today's date. At any point in time, if you want to find out what was the balance of your account or your bank account at a specific date in time, you would only have to go in here and type the date. So I don't have any transactions. We'll show it a little bit later. But for example, if I wanted to go see what is the balance as of October 19th, I would type that in, and then it would go take a look at all your transactions and figure out what the bank balance was at that time. I would suggest there are other ways of getting the bank balance at any point in time. So I would suggest that you just leave that to the original formula. So I'm going to type that back in, equals today, open brackets, close bracket, and that will set it back to today's date. And just leave it like that. I'll show you later on in the video how to get the bank balance at a specific date. Then finally here, cells H1 and H2 is the balance at the date that's specified in cell G2. So as I just showed you a few minutes ago, you enter your date here, and based on that date here, the amount that figures here is the bank balance at that date, which of course is still $100 because that was your opening balance. There have been no debits and no credits. So in this case, it's still indicating your $100. Okay. If I take a look down here at the bottom, actually before I do that, I need to cover some of the rest of the rows here just so that you understand the next parts of the explanations coming up. If I take a look at cells B2 and C2, you'll see B2, it says number of automatically inserted rows, and there's a number here, which is defaulted to 1. That just means here's the number of rows that are going to be automatically inserted whenever you use the Excel insert rows command. So for example, if I type in 3 here and hit enter, and I were to go down here, highlight, and then right click and do insert, it's not going to insert just one row, it's actually going to insert 3. Okay, and that's just a quick shortcut that I put in to be able to insert a multitude of rows in the spreadsheet whenever you need to do that instead of having to do it one at a time, right? So I can come back here, for example, grab those same 3 rows it just inserted and hit delete on that, and I'm back to the original number of rows that I had when I started showing this spreadsheet. Over here to the top right hand side, let me scroll over. You have a couple of explanation comments that are in there. I didn't put it all in simply because I've got this all explained in YouTube now. So you don't need to have all the instructions explained here in the spreadsheet, but I kept 1 or 2. The one that explains the number of automatically inserted rows as well as the ending balance using that today formula, as you can see here in this cell. So if ever you forget what the formula is, it's there. So I left just those 2 for information purposes. Back over here in this section here where you have all the green cells, I just put that in as a utility. It's a tax calculator, so I find it useful every once in a while. I get something that's on a receipt. We'll see multi-line transactions in a few minutes. If I want to take one item and figure out what was its total amount, including taxes, I put in this little tax calculator here. So I've already put in the current 5% GST amount, but if it ever changes, you can change it here. Also the HST amount, which is 9.975. Again, if that changes, you can change it here. And so that allows me to come in and type in a value, let's say here, $10. And what that does, it calculates the GST and the HST, and then over here in cell D6, it gives you the total amount with taxes. So it's just a utility. It allows you to quickly see, again, what the amount would be with taxes. So you don't have to go to any website or pull out your calculator. You've got it right here. This here you're already familiar with. It's just the YouTube links to get the instructions for this particular worksheet. And then finally, these 2 cells here highlight debit values that are greater than or equal to, and then here a value. That allows whatever value you put here, it will then compare all of your debit amounts that you have in this column to this value here, and any debit amounts that are equal to or greater that value will be highlighted. So if I were to just go in here and type in $100, I don't get a highlight, but if I type in $600, you can see that that gets highlighted, right? I put that in as a utility just to quickly see any transactions that you just want to be able to quickly find that are usually above what you would set as your maximum amounts for debit values. Um, you can put a higher number, lower number. It's currently set to 500. If I switch it to 1500, for example, you can see that the 600 here lost its highlight, right? So you can set it to whatever value that you deem appropriate for transactions that you want to highlight in the spreadsheet to draw your attention to. All right, and that's it for going through the header section of the spreadsheet. In the next section, we finally get into actually entering in some transactions here, so stay tuned. Finally, we've made it to actually entering transactions. I have to think that you guys go, my God, this man talks so much before actually getting to the good part. So I apologize for that. I just needed to explain the basics of the spreadsheet so that moving forward you understand everything else that I explained. So now we actually get to entering transactions, which is what you're going to be doing most of the time, right? So basic transactions, which is this section here of the video, they represent the most common and used transaction entry that you will enter. There are other types of transactions, and I'll get to that in other sections in this video, but 90% of what you're going to do is going to be for this particular type of transaction. So pay attention. This could be the only section that you need to listen to and come back to every once in a while because it's got the most important information that you need to know. So first things first, all transactions must be entered as of row 9 that I've highlighted here, and also above this yellow section here. So everything happens in between row 9 and that yellow section. I can't add any more rows below this yellow section, and that's just because the spreadsheet tracks all the totals and everything else below this particular row, and a lot of formulas are dependent on it. So everything needs to go between these two parts, so row 9 and the yellow section below. And we'll show, and we have shown in the past, how to insert some rows, but we'll get to what do you do when you get a transaction on this last line here and you need to add a row. Notice that the blank rows, which is the case for every row right now, have the text in columns B right here, and as well in column I, they're in italic blue. And that is to indicate that either no transaction date has been specified or that the transaction date that has been provided is a future date from today's date. And we'll talk about future transactions in another section of this video. The point is that as you enter in transactions, these will change from the blue italic to just your regular font color to indicate that that is now a valid transaction. So to begin with, you've got the date column, and to be part of any reporting that happens in this spreadsheet, a transaction must absolutely have a date. So if you've got no date entered and you enter in everything else as a description, it won't tally up anywhere else in the spreadsheet. So you have to give a date for everything, for every transaction, I should say. For whenever you enter the date, that will then transform, and we'll see in a few moments that the month column will reflect the month corresponding to the date that you enter. The exception to that is for credit cards, and when we get to the credit card transaction tab, we'll explain that. It's a little bit different because then we talk about posting dates, and so we'll get to that in another video, which is going to be the credit card transactions video. So to enter a date, for those of you who are not familiar with doing that in Excel, the way to go about that is to enter in the date as you, or in the following way. So let's say, for example, today's date, you give the month and the first three letters of the month, followed by the day. So let's say October 20th. And if I stop there and I just hit enter, it will automatically put in this year's year. If I specifically want to have a year that is either next year or the previous year, then I have to put in a comma and then give the year. So like 2019. So that would force it to October 20th, 19. Now, in this case here, I've got validation built into the spreadsheet and it knows that we're dealing with this year here. So it's telling you that you need to specify a valid date between January 1st and December 31st, right? So I can go here, hit retry, and instead of entering in 2019, I'm just going to go ahead and hit or type in October 20th, hit enter, and you can see that it has automatically added in the year. So just to make that a little bit clearer here, October 21st. And so the first one is the day and the last one is the year. Notice that the minute that I typed in a date, the month value changed from not applicable to the actual month corresponding to the month that you entered in on this particular, in the date column. Now this month column is a calculated column. You don't have to enter anything here. It automatically calculates that. You can see there's a formula up here. You don't need to understand how that works. But it does calculate the month. And so it's also something that you want to just let the spreadsheet do what it needs to do. So if by mistake you hit the delete key on that, what it will do is it will tell you that you can't delete the contents of that. And so when you hit OK, it will actually return it back to its original state. There are some cases, if for example I go here and I delete a couple of lines like that and I hit the delete, you can see that the formula actually disappeared. If that ever happens, just take one that already exists. You can do a copy and then a paste, and that will reestablish all the formulas such that it's ready to go. But in general, just leave that alone. Don't touch it. The spreadsheet will take care of everything that you need insofar as the month. Okay, so next is the description column. This is not necessary. You can leave it blank if you want to. I would highly suggest that you enter in descriptive text and try and be consistent in the way that you fill it out. But it allows you to give you or to type in a quick description of what the transaction is all about. And when we get to the next section of the video, I'll show you how to or how that works when you're entering text. And actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and do that here. So I've got a date already entered in here. And now for the description, let's say, for example, I'm going to show you how to do a mortgage payment. So in this case here, I'm just going to put in as description mortgage payment. Okay, and that is the description for my transaction. Over now to the debit column. Now, if you're new to bank and credit card transactions, you may not know what debit and credit means. But so just in case you don't, debit means money going out of your pockets or your bank account, and therefore it will subtract from your bank balance. And then a credit means money coming into your pockets and therefore your bank account, and therefore that amount will increase your bank balance. And so here, for example, let's say my mortgage payment is for $1,000. I type in 1,000. Notice that it has highlighted here because this $1,000 is higher than the $500 value that I typed in here, and that's why it got highlighted. So just as I showed before, if I go here and increase this to 1,500, then the highlight for that guy goes away, right? And so I can eliminate having too many transactions or debit amounts that get highlighted because my threshold value is too small. Notice also at the top here under total debits that the amount has changed from $0 to $1,000, and that's because right now if it's by looking at this debit column, it is totaling all the debits all the way up to October 23rd. And so there's only $1,000 in here, and that's why total debits is now at $1,000. Next column is the credit column. So we're going to show you how this works in the next section of this video, although I suspect you already get the point. But you typically use this column when entering your paycheck, for example, that gets deposited. So that's a transaction, and therefore it adds money or credits to your account, and that's where you would normally capture that. The category column. So you're going to please, or just recall in a previous video, the one that was the categories video. If you recall from that video, we set up all the categories and subcategories of revenues and expenses that we wanted to keep track of. So if I go over here, it was this tab here that we were using, right? So here are all the revenues, and so category and subcategories, and here's an example of an expense category with its subcategories, right? So we did that, the setup for all of that in a previous video. Well, all of that was so that these columns here, category and subcategory, actually take a look at what you put in there, and that's now what's available to you. So what's important to understand is that every transaction will fall into a specific category and subcategory. And so the category column is where you pick a main category from the drop-down list to indicate to which main category this transaction will be logged against. So you can either pick a value from the pick list. So if I hit this little down arrow, here's my pick list, or you can actually type it in if you want to. So in this case here, I'm going to go ahead and select, because this was for mortgage, I'm going to go here and select the house category. Let's move over now to the subcategory column. Now, what shows up in this pick list is directly related to what you selected as your category. So it will only show in this pick list the subcategories associated with the category you picked. So for the house category, we had defined all of these subcategories. And so I can either pick from this list, or if I wanted to, I could go ahead and type something in. But so let me just show you what happens if I type in something that doesn't or hasn't been defined. If I hit in test, it says that's not a valid subcategory. And so we have to pick something that is within that pick list. So it tries to make sure that you don't capture in any values that you shouldn't capture. So if I go back here, I can now go ahead and select mortgage, and that is a valid value, and I'm ready to move on to the next column, which is the note column. The note column is for your information purposes, and just like the descriptive or description column, it's not required for you to enter anything in there. And it's just meant for you to type in an explanatory note for this transaction. So for example, here, I'm going to go type in that it is for a bi-weekly mortgage payment. Okay, and so I hit enter, and now I've got that descriptive note that's associated with this transaction, which leaves us now with only one last column, which is the account column. This also right now is just a single list pick list, but it displays the name of the account, which is the name that's up here. And we all saw at the beginning of this section or this video that that is the name of the banking account that you created. And so what's important here is you need to specify this as being the checking account or whatever the only account that shows up in this pick list. If you don't, so let me go here and I hit delete. What happened is all these total debits went away. In other words, it can only calculate debits and credits for transactions that have an associated account. The minute I set this back to checking, now my total debits have been calculated. I've got no credits, but that would have been updated also. And so it's just important that you select it. Now, the way the spreadsheet is set up, as you insert rows, it will automatically insert that in there for you. So normally speaking, you shouldn't have to worry about um, putting in a value because it usually takes care of doing that automatically for you when you create new rows. So that's it. That's all there is to entering a bank transaction. And as I mentioned before, most of the transactions you enter will be basic transactions. So guess what? You've already mastered about 80% of what it is to enter transactions. So the next section of this video will be a quick explanation of what to do when you hit the bottom of the transactions. In other words, if all of these rows are filled in, and now I need to start adding something or new transactions at the bottom. All right, in this section, we're just going to take a quick look at what happens when you arrive at the bottom of your list of transactions. So let me just go here, show you real quick. Let me intentionally remove all these rows here. Right click, hit delete, and now I'm down to just two entries here, and I need to add extra entries. First of all, you pick up here the number of rows you want to automatically insert. So let's say this time around I wanted to insert 5. All I have to do is just go here in the first row, highlight the first row of the yellow section, and just go ahead, right click, and then select insert, and it will automatically insert your number of rows. And there's no more to it than doing exactly what I just showed you here. For example, if I were to try as of the second row in the yellow section and try and do an insert there, there is a validation that says you can only do it between rows 9 and just above the yellow zone or at the bottom, which is that first line. Anything below that, it will stop you from inserting extra rows. And that's again to make sure that the formulas continue working. So you hit OK, and it will undo the insertion of that row. And that's it. That's all you need to do if you need to insert extra rows when you get to the bottom of your list of transactions. So in this section here, I'm just going to quickly show you how to enter in something that could be related to your work, where you have a work expense, and then later on you have a refund, and how that would work inside this spreadsheet here. So situations like that where you have expenses and then a refund, examples of that is so for work you need to buy something for work, and then your employer will pay you back or refund you at a later date. That's an example of what we're going to take a look at here. Another example would be you're at a store and a friend asks you to pick up and pay for something for them, and they will pay you back later. Again, that's an example of money coming out and then coming back in the form of a refund. So we're going to use the first example, which is the work example. So let's say you're working from home for your job and you have to buy ink cartridges for your work printer. And this is something that your employer will refund you once you submit your expense account. So let's assume here, since we're working on the banking transactions, that you paid that with your Interac card, right? So going straight to your bank account in terms of a transaction. So I just started here by putting in a date, October 21st. And so as the description here, let's just say this is going to be work expenses. And I'm going to go then tab over to be ready to type in a debit. Now, before I type in the amount in the debit, just take a quick look here at my total debits, which is currently at 1,000, and my balance, which is at currently minus $900, because when I type in this amount here for the debit, these two values are going to update. So let's say, for example, the ink cartridges cost you $35, right? So I'm going to type in $35. And as I told you here, your debits is going to go to 1,035, and then your total balance is going to now decrease to minus 935. And so now I need to go over here to my category and go in and select the category that corresponds to, in this case here, where I enter my work expenses, which we had defined in our categories as being education and work. So I go here and I just select education and work. And if I now go to the subcategory, you can see that now the list of subcategories that show up are only the ones associated to education and work. So let's go here now and select work expenses. And we can type in as a note, office, ink, cartridges. Okay, and there you go. So my transaction is complete and it's done. And so now let's assume that we're a few days later and your employer has now deposited the refund in your bank account. So let's say now we're a few days later, October 25th, and notice that, of course, set the month to the correct month. Now, if I go here and I type for work description, let's say I want to use the same kind of description so that later on I can filter to find all my work expenses transactions. I'm going to use this exact same entry that I had for my description before. And again, we'll get into filtering a little bit later on. So I'm just going to type in W here, and as you can see, Excel tries to help you out by completing with something similar or the same that it already has from its previous list, so I don't even have to type it all out. And so it just gets faster as you move in time and get more transactions. You have to type less because it just reuses what you had before. Now this time around, it's a refund, so it's not going to be a debit. It's going to be a deposit and therefore a credit for the same amount, $35. And notice with the minute I tab out of here, my total credits is now going to go to 35, and this is going to go back to minus 900. So I'm going to tab out, and there you go. Total debit credits 35, and I'm back to minus 900. And I can just, if I wanted to here, I could go to hit the drop down list to again pick education and work. But if I were just to type in the letter E, you see that again it's trying to find what you already have in your spreadsheet and reuse it. So it's great. Just typing in the letter E and tabbing out will reuse the same thing. Now I could do W for work expenses. Just to show you something else in Excel, I can come here, grab the corner, click on it, and drag it down. And that copies it over also. That's another way of doing that. And then I can do the same thing here. I'm going to say office ink cartridges, and then here at the end, I'm just going to say that was the refund, just like that. And there you go. Simple as that. In terms of entering transactions where you have an expense that will then be refunded to you later on. All right, let's get into a multi-item transaction. So some of you might be wondering, well, what is a multi-item transaction? So this happens when you want to take the total amount of a transaction or receipt and break it down into individual parts or transactions. Examples of this would be, let's say you go to Canadian Tire and you buy supplies to wash your car, as well as, why not, buy Christmas lights for your house. So you pay the total amount, and let's say in this case you're paying with your debit card. But in your bank transaction worksheet, you want to be able to break that down into one transaction representing your car expenses and another transaction for your house expenses. Another example is going to the grocery store and buying food as well as a bottle of wine. And since you're tracking both your food and your alcohol expenses separately, you want to break it down into a transaction for each. So let's take the second example as I can show you with an actual receipt. So let me just drag this over here. Here's an example of a receipt. And that shows two kinds of items in this grocery total. So first of all, here at the bottom, you see the grand total of 209.24. But you can see in this section here, is where you have the part that describes the wine box that I bought for $35.99. Okay, so here's how you go ahead and capture that into a multi-item transaction. So let me just move this aside here for a second, and we'll come back to it later on. So what we want to do is to enter this inside the banking transactions tab, and that's going to be a two-line transaction. So let's go over here and start with an empty row. And if you don't have room for two rows, just insert two rows here. I've got plenty of room. I've got four left. I've defaulted here at the top for 5 rows to insert if I needed to insert more, but I've got room here. So let me just go ahead and let's start by entering a transaction date. So let's say this happened on October 26, and the description that I'm going to put here is, let's say, debit card payment for groceries. Right? That's just a suggestion. You can enter in anything that you want. I'm just giving you another example of choosing things or way to write in descriptions that are going to be easy to filter on. So if later on I want to filter on everything that's called debit card payments, I can do that. And so I'll show you again in a future video how to do filtering. So let's start by filling out or picking in the receipt the biggest amount. So again, let me pull this back in. You can see it's a total of 209.24. So let's just enter that in as for the full amount. So I'll go over here and type in 209.24. And then in the category, I'm going to go pick groceries. And for the subcategory, I'm going to put in food. You can enter in a descriptive note if you want to. Right here for this one here, I'm not going to do that. So we've got the first item or the first line in there, but that's for the total amount. And in fact, here, I'm going to come back up here and put an equal sign in front of that. And I'll get to that in a few seconds here. So I'll just put in the equal sign as I've got indicated here, because that just means for Excel that that's actually going to be a formula here in a moment. So now let's move on to the second part of the transaction. And the second part is to capture the alcohol portion of it. So I'm going to enter in the same date, and I'm just going to copy down the same description. I could have just typed in the letter D, and it would probably have auto-completed to the same description as the line above, but I just dragged it down. Now, let's bring back that receipt here and go back to see how much it was for the wine box. It was $35.99. Now, if you're interested in being precise and knowing, well, that's the amount before tax, I want to capture it with the tax amount to be as precise as possible. You don't need to do that if you don't want to be that precise, but just for argument's sake, let's say we want to do that here, and I want to show you how to use a tax calculator that is in this worksheet. So I'm going to take this $35.99, move this aside, go right in here, and I want to calculate the tax for that. So 35.99. And you can see over here that the total amount is 41.38. So I'm actually going to take this 41.38 and write it in here, 41.38. And then move over to the category. The category is still going to be groceries, but this time around, it's going to be for alcohol. Now, we're not done yet, because in reality, if I take the two together, right, if I highlight these two, take a look at the bottom, the total sum is for $250.62, which is more than the total amount. So what we need to do is tell Excel that we want to subtract from this 209 the 41.38. So that way the two combined together will total up to 209.24. So I'm just going to go back to highlight this cell here, the first one, and I'm going to place the cursor all the way to the right, hit the minus sign, and then point to the next cell right below. So notice that for Excel, it completed the formula by saying take 209.24 and subtract the amount that's written in cell D13. So when I hit enter, now you get the proper breakdown, which is $167.86 represents the food portion, and 41.38 represents the alcohol portion. If I highlight the two and now take a look at the bottom here, the sum is 209.24, which again is the total amount. And so that's how you do multi-line transactions. Now, what I do also, just to be able to track these multi-line transactions in the worksheet, I usually highlight the amounts, and then I'll go here and I will just give it a color. And so in my case, I just give it this light blue color. And that's just a visual way for me to quickly see whenever I have a multi-line transaction. And that way I can just go quickly here, grab them again together, highlight them, and see the total amount at the bottom for that transaction. Again, you don't have to do that, but that's my way of spotting multi-line transactions. So that's how you do it. This is just a two-line transaction. Let me quickly show you if it were more than two lines. I suspect you already get the point, but let me insert a few more rows here and do another one again for today's date. And let's say this time around, the example that I've got is to go to a clothes store and buy both clothes and shoes and some other stuff all related to clothing. So before I do that, you saw that by entering the extra lines, Excel copied down the coloring. I can go here, highlight that, and set that to no fill if that is the kind of thing that would bother you. So let me just put here, again, let's say I paid by debit card. So I'm going to say debit card payment. Notice that it's proposing the same text all over again, except this time it's not going to be for groceries. It's going to be for clothes, like that. And let's say, for argument's sake, that I bought for a grand total of $250. And this time it's going to be for clothing. And the first part of that is going to be, let's say I bought some clothes. And then on the second line after that, oops, I need to put in a date, a correct date, so October 26th. And still debit close. And let's say that this time I bought $50 worth of shoes, so $50. I'll go here to calculate the tax on that. So that's $57.49. And so that's also for clothing. And this time around it was for shoes. And just for argument's sake, to complete, like to show a third line. Same store, same transaction. And I bought just a small coat, maybe that was worth $100, right? So $100 with the tax is $114.98. So 114.98. And then finally put in clothing. And this time around, it's for coat, right? So now we, of course, have more than the total 250. In fact, it's 422, but I need the total to be 250. So as I showed you in the previous one, I'm going to start by saying it's equal to 250. But now I'm also going to say 250 minus. Now there's a couple of ways you could do this. You could say minus and then point to the next cell and do minus again and point to the final cell. That will work. So that's one way of doing it. Or the other way, if you want to use an Excel formula, you can say minus the sum of, and then just highlight the two entries here. So you can see D15 and D16, close that bracket, and there you go. So now here is my total, right? And so the total at the bottom is $250. And so that multi-line transaction is now complete. And I can go ahead and I can give it the same color, or just here to be able to distinguish, I could give it a different color. Again, you can do whatever you want. That just now allows me to see that these are two separate multi-line transactions. And so that's it. That's how you do multi-line transactions, both in the banking transactions tab, as well as also the credit card transactions tab. Okay, now let's take a look at how you would go ahead and use the spreadsheet to enter in your paychecks. And that can be either a couple of different kinds of cases, the simplest of which is just a one-line transaction to show the deposit of your paycheck, where the category is revenues and the subcategory is pay. So that's the simplest form. The second case is where you have a savings account where you want to transfer a portion over of your pay over to your savings account. And then a slightly more complex case is when your bank allows you to have an account where you can create virtual sub-accounts, where each sub-account represents something like individual envelopes of money to save money towards trips or to pay different bills like utilities or to put money towards something else. So in this video, we'll show how to capture each one of these cases. So let's start with the first case, which is the simplest one, where you want to record the deposit of your paycheck. And so all we need to do here is just go to an empty line, enter in a date, and then here a description. So for example, we can put in something like deposit and then paycheck, and then go to the credit column. Remember, you're depositing money, so money's going into the account. And so put in an amount for your pay. So for example, if I put in, let's say it's a paycheck of $1,800, notice that now your total credits here at the top has increased. And in this case here, our balance has gone into the positive, which is why it's got a blue color now to it to show that it's in a positive amount. And so here we just go to revenues and we put in pay, and there you go. That's the simplest case. You can put in optionally a note if you want to, but this is kind of sort of the simplest case of a paycheck deposit. Let's talk about the second case, which is we want to record the paycheck like we just did here. And then you want to also indicate that some of that goes actually into your savings account. So perhaps internally you do a transfer from your checkings account over to your savings account. So this is the exact same thing as the multi-item transaction approach, which we showed in the previous chapter of this video. So we already have here the original paycheck amount. Let's go see how we could now capture a second line of this to show transfer over to a savings account. So I'm going to go here, same date. I'm going to copy over the same description. And this time, let's say $300 automatically goes to your savings account. So I'm going to go to revenues, and I'm going to go to this time savings account. Now, of course, you didn't get $1,800 plus $300 as your paycheck. So just like the previous multi-item transaction, we're going to have to subtract from this $1,800 the amount that you moved to your savings account. So let's go up here, put an equal sign at the beginning, go to the end of the line and do minus, and then click on the $300 here that we put in. And that builds the formula correctly in Excel. Hit enter, and now of course your total transaction, if I highlight the two, is still 1,800, but it's reflecting 300 went to your savings account. Now later on in the videos, we'll show you how you can filter on that to find out what's the total that you've got on your savings account. And also later on, we'll show you how you could actually have just the first line, which is your revenues and your pay. And if you do a transfer to your savings account at another date, I'll show you in another video how you can do a transfer like that instead of doing it right here at the same time. Now, just like I did in the other multi-line, I could come here and highlight that with a certain color. Could be the same blue. Again, you don't have to do this, but if you wanted to be able to quickly find out or know that this is a multi-line transaction, it's a good way of doing that. So that leaves the last case where you want to spread out your paycheck amount into several savings accounts, or the concept of those envelopes. And so let's continue to build upon the previous example and add an extra transaction line to reflect that we also put aside $200 every paycheck towards a savings envelope for trips. So let me go over here, yet again, put in the um, same date. And this time around, maybe I want to be a little bit different. I could type in a different description if I wanted to, or I could keep it the same. Let's say I wanted to say that that is still a deposit for the paycheck, but in this case, we're going to put transfer to trips. Again, you can put whatever you want. And so this time around, we said it's $200. That is still going to go towards your revenues, but this time it goes to your savings and trips. Now, again, you'll need to adjust your formula here at the top because we have to account for that third item. So 1800 minus the 300 minus the 200. Okay, and so the total is still 1800, but it's broken up into these three pieces here. So pay, savings account, and savings trip. Again, I can highlight this. All of this shows this as one transaction. Now let's say this you want to always set up all of your paychecks to have the same three lines of transactions because that's something that you do every time you have a paycheck. So nothing prevents me then from coming here, highlighting the three lines, doing a copy, and let's say we're 2 weeks later. I can go in here and I'll do a insert copied cells, right? And so now I've just reproduced the same thing. Now sometimes what it does is it adds extra lines. If that's the case, just come up here and delete them, right? So we'll just delete like that. And here it is, it's repeated, and then give it a new date. And so I know this is going to happen in the future in 2 weeks from now. So let's say it's going to be November 15th. So I'm going to type in November 15th and I'm going to copy that to the next two transactions. Now, we're getting into the concept of future transactions, which is why it's written here, but it's in italic blue. It's just a way for me to show that this is an actual future transaction. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the next, in another chapter of this video. But it's just to illustrate the fact that you can copy over existing transactions every time here. So you don't have to re-enter that and it will figure the exact same way from one case to another. Okay. Now the last thing I want to show in this particular chapter of the video is if you say, well, okay, Dave, how do I show that now I've actually taken money out of my savings for a trip because I just spent $100 towards a trip, right? And I need to capture that correctly. So I can go in here. I'm going to just key in one to insert one line, and I'm going to go right above here, insert a line, and we'll give it again today's date, over 26. And now I'm going to say this is actually a withdrawal. Withdrawal. And this is from my savings trips. And this time it's not a credit, but it's going to be a debit, right? It's money coming out. So I'm going to put in $100. I am going to remove this fill here because it's not a multi-line transaction. And it's still against my revenues. And all I need to do is to say, well, it's against my revenues savings trips subcategory. And so now I've got 200 that was deposited and then 100 that was withdrawn. And that is all you need to do to show that money actually came back out of one of those savings or envelopes that you have in your bank account. Simple as that. And again, later on, I'll show you how to filter to be able to say, well, okay, how much do I now have left in my savings trips or in my savings account? And that's the filtering part. And that's a future chapter in this video. In the previous section of this video, I showed you how to enter your paycheck deposit at the same time as transferring an amount to your savings account. These were entered at the same time using the same date and as if the transfer was something that happened automatically when you deposited your paycheck. Sometimes you have to log into your bank account over the web or using your phone and make a transfer of funds between your accounts. When that happens, one account will be credited and the other will incur a debit of equal amount. This is a two-step process, which is no different than a multi-item transaction as explained earlier in this video. And in this case, there's a command in the worksheet that takes care of creating the appropriate transactions for you. I'll show you you can do this in this banking transactions tab. So let's say that you want to transfer $100 from your banking account to your TFSA account. What you want to do is go ahead and highlight the row where you would like the transaction rows to be inserted. And here I suggest you choose a row where today's date, because this is what it's going to be used, would follow the logical sequence of transaction dates already entered. So for example, today's date is November 11th, and so it would make sense to insert the transaction between row 21 that has October 26th and row 22 that has November 15th. So right here, it would make sense to insert it right there. So once I've highlighted the row, I press and hold the Alt key followed by the letter J. Up comes this pop-up that wants to know from which account to which account you want to make your transfer. So I'm going to make it from the checking account to my TFSA, put in $100, and then click OK. When it's done, it'll pop up a message that says the transfer was created in rows 22 and 23. I'll hit the OK button to dismiss that, and there you go, they're here. And what you notice is that you've got two transaction rows, one that is a debit for $100 against your checking account, and it put in a default text for you that you can edit along with today's date. And then a second transaction row with, again, today's date, the same default text, and then a credit to the account where the money was transferred to, which was the TFSA TD. That's how you capture money transfers in this worksheet. It's simple as that. In the next section, I will cover how to enter payment of credit cards. In this section of the video, I'm going to show you how to enter a credit card payment using the Alt-U command that automates this process. Just like in the previous section where we described how to enter money transfers, making a credit card payment results in two transactions also. One transaction in your banking transactions worksheet to show the payment coming out of an account, and one transaction in the credit card transactions worksheet to show the payment credited to the appropriate credit card. Let's see how that works. So just like in the previous section, highlight the row where you'd like to insert the transaction in the banking transactions worksheet. I suggest you choose a row where today's date would follow the logical sequence of transaction dates already entered. So for example, today's date is November 11th, and so it would make sense to insert the transaction between row 23 that has November 11 and row 24 that has November 15. So let's go ahead and highlight that row right here. And now just press and hold the Alt key followed by the letter U. The pop-up appears. And let's say today we're paying our Visa card, but you could select any other of your cards here. And the amount, let's say we're paying $100 on it, and that is coming out of our checking account. You could use any of these other accounts if you wanted to, but let's say it's checking account. I'm going to click on OK, and it's going to display a message here that said it created a placeholder transaction in the banking transactions worksheet on row 24, and then another one in the credit card transactions worksheet on row 10. So I click on OK to dismiss that. I've got it highlighted here, so notice it used today's date. It inserted a default text, which you can edit, the $100 as a debit to your checking account. And then now if we go over to the credit card transactions tab, you can see here highlighted on row 10 is the credit card payment, same text, no date this time around, and that makes sense because you have to wait until the credit card company has received and processed your payment, and that's rarely on the same day as when you pay. You can come back and enter the correct day once the transaction shows up in your credit card posted transactions. So for example, if we were to come back and now we're going to make it the same day, but let's say we were a few days later, November 11th, and now it would figure in as now being processed. And that's it. Simple as that. All right. In this section of the video, I'm going to talk about future date transactions. If you'll recall, in a previous section of this video, you saw me copy the paycheck transaction rows and paste them as new paycheck deposit transactions and provide a future date. When I provided the future date value, you saw the whole row change to italic with the color blue, and the month column got highlighted in yellow. And you can see those right here. I'm going to highlight those right there. Those were the 3 rows that were actually copied over from these 3 rows, but I changed the date to a date that is somewhere in the future. And so that's why they got colored in italic blue, and this month column got highlighted in yellow. So that's the visual way of spotting future transactions. And so the worksheet supports the idea of entering transactions that will happen in the future. And these transactions don't show up in any of the reporting tabs. So we have other reporting tabs down here that will give you an idea of where you're at in your expenses year to date and those kinds of things. Future transactions are left out. They only become active or figure in the reports, of course, when we reach that particular date. Then the spreadsheet will automatically change those back to the same colors as these guys here, and they will figure in the calculations. So you might be wondering, what's the use of these future date transactions? I like to use these to enter recurring transactions like monthly bill payments that happen automatically. Consider them to be like a placeholder or a reminder transaction of something that's coming up in the future. So, for example, let's say I want to enter my monthly Spotify bill payment. That just so happens to happen automatically, right? Payment occurs in an automated way through Spotify. So here's how I'd go ahead and do that. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go right to the last row. And let's just say that the next Spotify payment is going to come up on November 16th. So notice that the minute I enter that date, it goes in blue italic. This stays yellow highlighted. And I'm going to go in and type in a description here. I'm going to call it automatic monthly subscription payment dash Spotify, right? And that also stays in blue italic. And let's just say that because I've got a monthly or a family plan, it's about $16.50 every month. And so that's in the debit column. In the category, I know that this is under my entertainment category. So I'm going to pick entertainment. And I'm going to go ahead and say that that is Spotify. And that's kind of sort of how you enter your future transactions, right? So this one here, it's a placeholder. And until we reach November 16th, it's going to stay as a future transaction and not yet get compiled in any of the other reporting tabs. So now that I've got that one entered, let's make that a little bit more useful, and let's go ahead and copy that a few more times to show other dates in the future. So I'm going to copy that, go down here on the first yellow row because I need to insert that below. So I'm going to go insert copied, and let's do it, I don't know, once or twice. And so I think I need to copy that again to have this work correctly. And so go insert copied, right? So there we go. I've got it entered 3 times. Now they're all on November 16th. I can go ahead and change the date here and set it to, let's say, December 16th. Keep in mind that this is Excel, so I can also use formulas. So I can say something like equals this day here plus 30, which means 30 days later, or about a month later, and it will automatically calculate that for me also, right? So I can do that if I wanted to. So I'm covered now for November and December. This one here would normally happen into next year, so I can go ahead and delete that if I wanted to keep things within this year here. And so now I've got 2 placeholder transactions that will occur later on in time. And again, I can see that through just the blue color here. Keep in mind also that let's go ahead and insert another 1 or 2 rows here just to illustrate another concept, which is I can create future transactions that don't yet have a date here. In other words, it'll stay as non-applicable. And an example of that would be, let's say, for example, you wrote a check and you don't know when it will be cashed in. So I just use the word writing a check, or the expression writing a check. I know most of you don't do that anymore today, especially the younger generation. But here's an example if you were to write out a check, how to do that. So let's here, I've got a blank row. I'll leave the date empty, and as a description, I'm going to say that is for check number 015, and that was for Joe's Plumbing, right? And he cost me $150. So I wrote out a check for $150, and that's a house expense. So I'll go here. I'll go to, oops, not groceries, but the one right below, house. And that was for some kind of maintenance to the house. And as a description, I'll put in installation of new faucet in the bathroom. There you go. So that transaction is there as a placeholder. I don't have a date yet, but the minute I log into my bank account and see that that cash has been, that check has been cashed in, I'll see the date for that transaction, and then I'll just have to come back here, write the date, and I'm done. And so that's how future transactions work. Guess what? We've now covered pretty much everything you need to know on how to enter banking transactions. And by the way, it also means that you know how to enter credit card transactions. I created a separate video for credit card transactions that cover the small differences, as well as how to pay credit cards. So you can go check that one out for the credit card transactions. The last 2 sections of this video are meant to show you how you can quickly get useful information, as well as how to use the built-in Excel filtering capabilities. Let's start with the summary function that I created, because the filtering capabilities will be covered in the next section of the video. And the best way to explain this summary function is to actually show it. And so the idea is to start by highlighting a row where you'd like to get a summary picture at that specific point in time where you have highlighted. So if I go here in the spreadsheet and I just pick this last row here, which is the last row where the dates are actually current dates and not future dates. Before I activate the summary function, just take a look here at the balance, which is in cell H2, which says $340.76. You might recall in the previous sections of this video where I said there's another way to get the bank balance instead of just changing the value here in J2 for the date to calculate the balance at that date. The other way is this way here. Highlight the row that is of interest. So we're going to pick this one here for the first demonstration and just press and hold the Alt key and then followed by the S key. And a couple of things happen here. As you can see, to the right of the spreadsheet, columns J through N now contain some values. Notice also that columns H and I have been temporarily hidden so that we can see these column values here without having to scroll left and right in the spreadsheet. So let me walk you through what's here. First one is in column J, the account balance. So notice just before I had or activated this function, I told you to watch what the current balance was in cell H2. Well, it's the same amount, $340.76. So that's column G. Over into column K, not G, sorry, J. And now over into column K is the total amount of the combined debits and credits for the selected row and therefore the selected category and subcategory. So here it's indicating $100, which is the total amount of debits and credits for revenues, saving for fun stuff. There's only one entry and it's a total credit amount. And so you've got a total of $100 of credits. You'll also notice that there's a colored bar. In this case, it's green. So that bar will either be green if it's for a revenue category, or it will be red if it's for an expense category. The size or length of the bar is a comparison against the budget amount for the month, which brings me to column L. Right now, the budget for the month, there is no value here because we have not entered any entries in the budget tab. So right now, this 100, the size of that colored bar is just shown as half of it because Excel makes an approximation and just splits it in two to say this is on the positive side, this is on the negative side, and since I don't have a value, it keeps it on the positive side. And by a value, I mean for the month. Over now to column M, which is the total year to date. And right now what it's showing is $100. So year to date for revenues, savings, fun stuff, the total is $100. And if I were to take a look at each one of these transactions, there's only one that has savings, fun stuff. So it's only normal that its value is also $100. And the colored bar works the same way as this one here in column K. And it's in comparison for the budget for the year at this point in time. Okay, so let's do this again. But this time we're going to highlight another row. We're going to highlight a row that has, for example, an entry for clothes, which is this row here. So I'm going to pick row 14. Notice that when I picked the row, it re-expanded columns H and J so that it would be easier to see your transactions here and continue to work if you wanted to capture more transactions. And again, if what I do is an Alt S for summary, what happens is a couple of things. First of all, it cleared out the previous entries that were here lower in the spreadsheet to keep things nice and clean. It hid again columns H and I and performed a new calculation. And now it's giving you the account balance as of October 26th, which at that point in time was in the negative. And you can see that the total for the month for clothes is $77.53, which is the exact amount here. And that's because in October, there are no other entries for clothing clothes. And that's why those two numbers are exactly the same. There is still no budget entries, and therefore that's why you've got no values indicated in column L. But you will notice that your total year to date for clothing clothes is $207.53. Now, if I take a look at all my transactions that I have in this tab here for the banking transactions, I still only have this one entry for clothes. And so where did this $207 come from for the year to date? Well, that's because the summary function actually looks at all of your transactions in both the banking transactions tab as well as the credit card transactions. So if I now go over here to the credit card transactions, you will see that I actually have a credit card transaction for close in the amount of $130 in the month of September. And so now when I come back here to my banking transactions, and let me scroll back here, you'll see that if I take the 77.53 and add the $130, that's how I get to the 207 total amount that is written here in your total year to date. So let's see what happens if we actually go and make a couple of entries in the budget column. That'll help us understand these color bars and their sizes that are there. So let's go to the budget tab. Let's expand out clothing here. And in the month of October, let's go in and enter, let's say we put in a budget for $500 in the budget tab. Let me now go back to the banking transactions. I still have that row highlighted, and I'm going to once again press and hold the Alt S to redo the calculation. And now you can see the total for the month hasn't changed, but now you can see the budget for the month is $500. And that red bar is now, or the length of it is considerably shorter. And because the length of that bar is actually the percentage of the total for the month compared to the budget for the month. So it's only a small percentage of the $500, and that's why that bar is a lot smaller. And you can see now that the budget year to date has moved up to $500, and the 207 has remained unchanged. However, the length of the bar again has also now changed in length to reflect the percentage of $207 compared to the budget of $500. And so now let's go back one last time to the budget tab. And let's say now for September, we also put in a budget of $200 for that month there. And if I go back to my banking transaction, hit and press and hold Alt S again, it redoes the calculation. Nothing has changed for the month, but you can see that for the year to date, it went from $500 to $700, and the red, or the length of the red bar, has gone down a little bit in size. That's what the summary function does. At any point in time, if you want to clear out, these columns here and get back to where you were, you can press and hold the Alt key followed by the C key for clear, and you can see everything goes back to normal, and it has erased those calculation columns at the end. So it's a pretty useful function to have at any point in time. You can use that in the banking transaction. You can use it in the credit card transaction. And like I said, it gives you a quick view of where you are at the point in time of the row that you highlight by looking at the date and the category and subcategory of the selected row. All right. Hey, thanks for hanging in there. This is the last section of the video. I know this is by far the longest of the training videos, but with good reason. It shows you everything you need to know on how to enter transactions and covers pretty much all the different types of transactions you will need to enter. Well, except for one last type, which is how to show payments for credit cards. And I'll cover that in the next video. You'll see it's pretty simple. So thanks for your patience, and it's only fair to start showing some usefulness for having the discipline to enter all of your transactions. So you're going to see that after a while of entering transactions, this worksheet here will start to have quite a few rows of transactions, enough to sometimes make it difficult to find or isolate a certain transaction if you need to. Now in this case here, we only have about 30 transactions, but this can very easily grow into a couple of hundred lines here. So that's why it's important to learn how to use some of the filtering capabilities. And that's where Excel's data filtering will come in really handy, not just to find transactions, but also to see totals on transactions that you filter on. So what I'm about to show you can be really useful for answering questions like, show me how much I've spent on groceries, or how much did I spend on my car last month, or when did I buy this? So let's get started on showing you how to use the filtering capabilities. So first, I don't know if you've noticed, but in this row here, let me just highlight it. So in this row here, each one of the column headers has got obviously the title of the column, but you see that they have these drop down arrows. So you've got some for the date, the month, the description, debit, all the way out to the account. And these are drop down arrows that you can use to go ahead and filter the data. So let's take a first look. So if I take, for example, here on the month, if I take a look at the drop down arrow on the month, you're going to see that when I click that drop down arrow, Excel presents you with some filtering options, sorting from A to Z and Z to A, but what we're really interested in are the filters down here. So you got things like text filters, which would allow us to look for things that are either equal to, not equal to, begins with, whatever, right? So that would allow me to filter on a certain month name if I wanted to. We'll see that in another example later. But more importantly, let's take a look at what it sees in this column. So it sees all of these months based on the entries that you made so far. And so I can go here and let's say I'm interested in filtering the transactions that happened in October. So first I'm going to click here to remove all the check marks. And then I'm going to actually go here and put a check mark in the October box and hit OK. Now, before I hit OK, watch what happens, or let me show you a couple of things. So down here, I've got a subtotal of almost $1,900, and that's because it's it's a subtotal of all the debits for all the transactions. Now, when I hit OK, it's now only showing the October transactions. And you can see that in October now, my subtotal for all my debits is $1,700. And I've got a total credit of $1,900 for a difference of about $240, right? So whenever you filter down this data, all these subtotals will adjust to show what they represent for the transactions that you actually see here in the screen that have been filtered. So you can also continue to filter, right? So I've applied a first filter, which is on the month. Now let's go see, for example, I want to now do a second level of filtering. And this time around, I'm interested in filtering on the categories column right here. And in particular, what I'm interested in is on the revenues. So let me just go here, click the down arrow. And this time around, I'm interested in seeing only those transactions that have to do with revenues. So again, I'm going to click this select all to remove all the check marks and then click on revenues and click OK on that. And now my list is now further reduced, so still in October. And now just looking at the revenues, and now I can see that my total debits are 200 and my total credits are 1900 for a difference of 1700. And it's showing me that all my revenue transactions are either pay for savings accounts or savings for trips or even for fun stuff. So now let's do one last level of filtering. And this time around, I'm going to take a look at my subcategories, and I'm interested in finding out now how much that I put aside for all my savings. So when I click this drop down arrow, notice that the only thing that it's showing me now in this list is only those entries that have been filtered. In other words, since I filtered down by October and then by revenues, then the only filters that are left are for those transactions that actually appear or that have been filtered. So just to illustrate that point, let me hit cancel here and let me clear out my categories to select everything again. And you'll see that now if I pick on the subcategories, I've got much more here. So the point being that the list of available things that you can choose from will diminish or reduce based on the filtering that you've applied so far. So let me go back now here and go to revenues again. And that list has now gone down to only what's left. And so this time around, let me remove pay, and I want to see everything that's savings. Now that would be one way of doing it. There's another way also that I can do it, which is to play around with text filters. So let me show you here how I can say, let's find every um, entry that begins with. So if I click on begins with and I just type in savings, then hit OK, you can see that it has now filtered down to only those entries. It's removed the pay entry and it's filtered it all the way down to only those ones that have got or that begin with savings, which would have been the equivalent, by the way, of just clicking each one of these. But I showed you how to use text filters instead, right, with any one of these conditions here. So now I've got it all the way down to my savings, and I can see that so far in the month of October, I had $600 of credits in my savings with $200 of debits. So my net savings for the month was $400. So suppose now I wanted to do one last level of filtering and go back to the subcategories and say, well, I'm more interested in just what I put aside in my savings for my trips. So let me go here, hit the down arrow and say, really, I'm only interested in my savings for my trips, and hit OK. And now I can see, right? I've put $200 of credits and taken out $100 in terms of debits. So net, I've put in $100 towards my savings for trips in the month of October. And so this is, by the way, one of the ways that you can find out very quickly how much you've put in each one of your savings accounts by filtering all the way down to these columns here. Okay, so now everything's been filtered down. You might ask me, well, okay, how do I clear all these filters? Well, it's quite simple. Anytime you can see that you've got this kind of sort of filtering icon on it, means that a filter has been applied. So you can go ahead and click that column, and then you can either do a select all, or you could do a clear filter from and whatever the subcategory. There's two ways of doing it. So let me do it this way for the first one to show you. And so now all the subcategories filtered on revenues reappear. And this one here also has a filtering on it, and I'm going to use clear. And now I've got them all back for all the categories and subcategories for October. And then finally come back here and do a clear. And now I'm back to all of my transactions for the entire worksheet. If, for example, I wanted to do some other type of filtering, so filtering like using the numbers that are in your debit and credit columns. And in this case, let's say I'm interested in finding all debits that are for values greater than $150. So I can go here on the debit column, hit the down arrow, and use number filters and say greater than or equal to, and then type in 150 and hit OK. And now it's showing me all those transactions that fit that criteria. And I have only 3 right now. And you can see one is exactly $150. And then you have the 2 other transactions here that have been filtered. So there are many ways of filtering, either by using text searches or numbers, to be able to find and filter the data the way you'd like to see it. So let me clear this filter here and show you another filter that you can apply. So remember from the very beginning of this video, I've always told you, hey, when you enter in your descriptions, try and use consistent ways of providing your descriptions so that from a filtering perspective, you can isolate that. Well, here's a good example. So let's say now I want to find all of my transactions where the description was debit card payment. So I can go here, hit the down arrow. You can see that it's providing, or Excel is providing, all the different unique text values that you've entered so far. So I can say, hey, clear all of this. And I'm interested in everything that is debit card. So I can either pick them here. I could do these two. I can do multiple picks. That would have been one way. The other way would have been, for example, begins with debit card, right? Or just debit, right? As we saw in the previous example. So let me just select these two and hit OK. And now I can see all my transactions that have as a description debit card, or at least that start with debit card. And so that allows me to see, for example, that I've put in or I've made about $460 of transactions, all related to my debit card since I've been using this spreadsheet. And so really what you've answered is the following which is show me all transactions where I purchased using my debit card. And I could do a further filtering and remove from that list. I could say, well, I'm not interested in the groceries. I just want to see the ones that are for clothes. And now I filtered down even further, right? So we're going to do one last example. And before I do that, let me clear out the filters and say, suppose I want to find out if all my work expenses have been refunded and when did the refunds occur? Well, that's pretty simple, right? All I would need to do is go all the way over here to my subcategory column and filter on, let me remove all the others, everything that is work expenses related. So just this subcategory here and hit OK. And now everything else has been filtered out. I can see my two transactions. One that shows that on October 21st is when I actually incurred the expense. And then on October 25th is when I actually got refunded. And again, if I take a look at the subtotals at the bottom, it's showing a subtotal of $35 of debits and $35 of credits, which means the difference is zero, and which means that all outstanding, there are no outstanding work expenses that have not been refunded. So you're all clear in terms of your work expenses. You know you're up to date in having submitted your expenses and having them refunded to you. And that's it for the banking transactions tab. Again, thanks for hanging in there, and I hope you're starting to see the usefulness and value of this worksheet. In the next video, I cover the credit card transactions tab, and in the following videos, I cover the green reporting tabs that are down here. These tabs compile all the transactions from both transaction tabs and provide you with summary views that will give you a complete understanding of the status of your revenues and expenses against your budget. And that really is the ultimate goal and reason why I created this spreadsheet here. So let me just show you one real quick, right? The summary tab, I'll go here and I'll pick for the month of October. And you'll see it starts to compile up all your information. So for example, all your revenues up here for the month of October, according to the transactions that you've entered, and for your expenses for each one of your main categories, all of the expenses. We got one that we had an actual budget item for, so it's comparing it against your budget. It'll do that for the month, for the year to date, and then for the total year forecast. And we'll get into that in the future videos, but just to show you some of the value that you get after that once you enter in all of your transactions, right? So this is a real quick way of seeing exactly where you are in your finances. So don't worry, even though this video is quite long and may lead you to think that entering transactions is a long and complicated task, I think you'll agree that in fact entering transactions is actually easy and quick. The video is long only because I explained everything you could do and how to enter all kinds of different types of transactions. So in closing, let me come back to what I said at the beginning of the video. You'll only get the full value and usefulness of this spreadsheet if you take the time and, more importantly, the habit of entering your transactions on a regular basis. It takes just 5 minutes, sometimes even less per day, to keep it up to date, but the information it'll provide you with is invaluable. So like I said, money is a great servant, but a horrible master. So control your money instead of your money controlling you. If you have any suggestions on how to make this even better, then by all means, let me know so that we can all benefit. So good luck. Have fun with it, guys.